We are back with another relaunch episode at the Teacher Think-Aloud Podcast as we gear up to celebrate our fifth birthday.
All right, 5 years of reflection, conversation, and community.
Boop, boop.
It feels like just yesterday we were launching our very first episode back in April of 2021.
Mhm. Leading up to this milestone, we're diving back into the archives to relaunch 5 episodes that have deeply shaped our mission. And these aren't just greatest hits, they are the conversations that stayed with us long after the microphones were turned off.
For our second relaunch today, we're bringing back a vital conversation from 2022, episode 34, Trauma Sensitive Teaching. We were so lucky to connect with our guest and now wonderful friend, Sherry MacKay, after colliding with her almost literally at the TESOL International Conference that year.
I remember that day fondly.
Mhm.
She actually caught us trying to take a selfie in front of the giant TESOL letters
Yeah.
and struggling. And she offered to take the photo for us because she said she liked our energy, which I love. I love that.
That's such a Sherry thing to,
Yeah.
to say.
Yeah.
But she really did save that photo. And then
Mm.
she completely shifted our perspective on what it means to be a supportive educator. Her work focuses on supporting learners of refugee and immigrant backgrounds. And she also helps teachers better understand how to support students whose trauma might be invisible to us.
Right. So, in this episode, we start by exploring the definition of trauma. As Sherry says, trauma is not what happens to you, it's what happens inside you.
Yeah, that was a huge takeaway for me from this
Hmm.
episode. It's a physical experience, not just a mental one.
Yeah.
We discuss how trauma lives in the body and how that can literally shut down a student's ability to learn.
Yeah. We also tackle this behavior trap. It's easy to see a disruptive learner, especially an adult learner, and think that they're just trying to control the class.
Yeah.
But this conversation reminds us to pause and ask what is happening beneath the behavior.
Mhm.
They might be calling out for safety, not attention.
And finally, last little preview here, we talk about the oxygen mask.
Mm-hmm.
Teachers cannot provide a safe space for students if they aren't taking care of their own vicarious trauma first.
This episode is a call to move toward a more empathetic, holistic way of teaching.
We hope this conversation inspires you as much as it did us.
But first, a word about our sponsors.
This episode is sponsored by Ellie.
Ellie is one of the world's leading online content providers for English teachers.
If you're looking for relevant, ready-made materials to get your students talking, head over to ellie.com today.
That's ELLII.com.
I want to share another quote that I think connects to this. It's like, we don't see things as they are, we see them as we are, right? So it's really difficult for me to say, oh, Shey, come on, it's not a big deal. Well, when it is for you, right? So that's when empathy really is important, right? To really listen to a person and say, oh, gosh, I see that's really hard for you. And not to say, okay, it wouldn't be for me, but I don't know, right? Because I'm not you. I haven't lived your life. I haven't had your shared experiences. And so we may experience something, the exact same thing, or like people that are raised in the same house, right? And you think, oh, same parents, same culture, and they're all going to react differently. So it's just really respecting each person for where they're at. So yeah, it could be something that looks really like minute to you, but for Anna, it's a big deal. We don't know. So that's this idea of being empathetic and teaching empathy to others.
Anna, I don't know about you, but our conversation with Sherry left my head spinning. I mean, having spent time working with refugees throughout my career, I thought I had a grip on what trauma entails, but my definition proved rather vague in the end.
Yeah, I mean, trauma is something that many teachers need to confront in their classrooms, whether they're working with clear cases of trauma, students who've seen the atrocities of war, refugees and whatnot, but also the collective trauma that came out of the COVID-19 pandemic or something private, specific to their home life, something that to outsiders might seem invisible. Trauma is not always what we assume it to be. It's incredibly personal. And as teachers, our training doesn't always prepare us to support students experiencing trauma.
So today, listeners, we're taking a look at trauma, how it's defined, how it shows up in our classrooms, and how we can support students who have experienced or are currently experiencing trauma. Hello, and welcome to the Teacher Think-Aloud Podcast, a podcast for reflective practice for teachers of English around the world. I'm your co-host, Shey.
And I'm Anna, and we were lucky enough to collide with today's guest, Sherry, at the International TESOL conference earlier this year. You took our picture in front of the TESOL sign.
My first day there, and I saw the two of you, and it's one of those situations where you see people, and they're trying to do a selfie, and you're like, those TESOL letters are big. We need the letters and you in the frame. So I took a picture, but it was also your energy. I mean, the two of you are just dynamos.
That's very sweet. You kind of pitied us a little bit taking that photo, maybe, but that's okay. But it wasn't until we attended Sherry's workshop later in the week that we learned about all of the incredible work that she does around trauma. Let's meet her.
Yeah, so my name is Sherry MacKay, she, her. And my background is teaching English as a second language. I started in Toronto, Canada, taught newcomers, both immigrant and refugee backgrounds. Many years teaching English.
Sherry has taught for many years in many contexts and has founded organizations and communities of practice to support teachers in their work. But before we could hear about her experience and bask in her expertise, we had to throw her a curveball, our signature icebreaker.
Yes.
So before we dive in more into those details of the amazing work that you do, this is something we do on every episode where we have a guest, which is we like to throw a little icebreaker question, a surprise icebreaker question to our guests. So our question for you today, and don't think about it for too long, but what is something that you absolutely can't cook?
The first thing that came to my mind is a souffle, and I've never even tried, but somehow people always say it's really difficult. Following like really minute directions in a recipe where you have to be very precise, that's not my favorite thing. That's why I prefer cooking over baking, I think, because you can kind of add a little.
I'm with Sherry. I'm interested in eating souffles, but not baking them.
I love baking. I appreciate the simplicity of it. Really, all you have to do is follow the directions and you're golden.
No. Following instructions isn't really my thing. But anyway, back to Sherry. So Sherry, tell us about your background with trauma-aware teaching.
Yeah, so back in Toronto, this is 27 years ago, we didn't talk about trauma. But, I had students who had experienced trauma and who were showing signs of it in class. When I was in Albuquerque, New Mexico, I got involved with a fascinating project called the Refugee Wellbeing Project. And that's when I learned more about the refugee resettlement in the US and really how little support newcomers receive. And I'll just give a little bit of background with that. With this project, they interview newcomers, and undergraduate students are committed to, they learn about the countries where these newcomers are coming from, and then they learn about the resettlement process, and then they're eventually partnered up and they act as advocates for these newcomers. It's a beautiful project. And for some of the individuals, if they want, they can have therapy. And that's when I learned a little bit about, it was called narrative exposure therapy, and kind of how that really supported a lot of the newcomers. And the other thing we did was we had learning circles. And in these learning circles, these community circles, essentially, the advocate be partnered up with their partner, and we would have different topics. It would really come from the newcomers. What did they need to know about? So was it healthcare? Was it parenting in the US? Maybe it was sharing one of their holidays or sharing our holiday. So it was a lot of just sharing of cultures and just supporting them in whatever they needed here.
There are a few key words that Sherry says here that strike me as being at the heart of what we do as educators: community, advocate, sharing, support.
Yes. So much good can come from connecting with students on an individual level. And I love that Sherry highlights the importance of recognizing what your students need and then acting on it. For Sherry, this experience acted as an inspiration to found Glocally Connected.
And then in 2015, I co-founded Glocally connected with a dear friend, Dr. Celine Nielsen Yildiz. We had both actually left where we currently live, which is Riverside, California. I was in Albuquerque, New Mexico. She was in Eastern Turkey. She was teaching at a university there, and this was in 2012 when there were a lot of Syrians fleeing the country. And where she was in Gaziantep, they had set up a very large refugee camp. I moved back to Riverside a week after Celine moved back here. And then what started everything was there was that photo of that drowned boy, that Syrian boy, and there was the army guy who was leaning down to pick him up. And we just thought, okay, we need to do something. So we started Glocally Connected that fall. 2016, I started an English class for Afghan women. And the class just grew. It was mostly word of mouth. And I'll just say the one reason we started this English class is that there were adult schools here. And I always support people to go to the adult schools because they're full-time programs. But in the adult program here, you need to have some basic English. And they didn't have childcare, and public transportation is terrible here. So we provide transportation, childcare, and we accept learners at all levels. And so I started working with these women. They were very cautious in the beginning around me. What was this about? And why was I doing this? But eventually, they opened up. And then, I started hearing their stories. So that was one thing. So, of course, you hear those stories. They're coming from Afghanistan. They've gone through the resettlement process. There's going to be trauma. Not only that, a lot of them had a lot of physical ailments, a lot of gut issues, back pain, chronic headaches. One woman she was young, and I'll say she didn't have children. She was newlywed. She seemed very bright. I just thought, for her, she's going to really kind of progress quickly. And these women kept saying, give us homework. And they would all do their homework except for her. I'm like, why is that? And it turned out not only did she have the trauma from the past and the resettlement, but she was in an abusive relationship. So it was very difficult for her, obviously, to focus and to learn the language.
I really admire that Sherry's underlying goal was to support the students holistically. Like, she recognized the hurdles they had to jump over to be able to focus on learning, and she made it her mission to remove these hurdles.
Yes. And not just that, but other initiatives grew from this.
I am a member now of ESL with TLC on Facebook, so I wanted to ask a little bit more about that. When did ESL with TLC come about, and how did that idea come about?
Right. So working with these women and recognizing that they all experience trauma, I connected with a local psychiatrist, Dr. Marianne Shepper, and she would come to our class once a month and teach the women strategies for coping with stress. And and we did it was called the O'Connor Resiliency Scale, where the women would self-assess the beginning, midway through, and the end of our sessions, basically to see how they viewed themselves and their own resiliency. And I just got more and more into studying trauma and trying to understand it more. And then I just realized that so many teachers, we're all working with these individuals who, trauma, but we've never had the training. So I wanted to support teachers in this. So I started transformational learning communities to provide training for teachers. And with that, I started this Facebook group to build a community where teachers can go get resources, ask questions, learn from each other, learn strategies for themselves, for their students. So the organization I started is Transformational Learning Communities, being Transformational Learning Communities and Tender Loving Care.
Nice. I love that. Well. The dual meaning there. Yeah. Wow. So, Sherry, one of the challenges that comes up when working with teachers around the topic of trauma is that maybe teachers who don't work with the refugee community or work with known victims of domestic violence, for example, they think that their students don't have any sort of trauma. And so I think that it means that we have to stop and think about what trauma means and define trauma and get our teachers to think that trauma is not just, where war has taken place, right? Or violence has taken place. Trauma can be so much more than that. So what does trauma mean to you? How can we define it in a way that's more inclusive?
Right. Yeah, it's a big question in a sense, right? Because just by living, we've all, you could say, experienced some form of trauma. We've lost loved ones. You've been in a car accident. I mean, honestly, I broke my arm a year and a half ago, and it turned out to be a pretty traumatic event. At the time, I didn't realize, but it was. So all these things, but with trauma, there's the incident, but it's also, we're all very unique individuals. And I'm going to share a couple of really succinct definitions. One is by Dr. Gabor Mate. He's a leading expert in trauma. And he said that trauma is not what happens to you, it's what happens inside you.
Mm.
And this is really, really important to understand that it's not just, oh my gosh, that was really scary and it's in my mind. It's in our body. It's in our autonomic nervous system. And another definition is from Deb Dana, and hers is trauma creates an autonomic demand that shapes the system away from connection to protection.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if I can talk about something that kind of helps us understand what happens to the body, but there's something called the Polyvagal theory.
Mm.
Can I share a little bit about this?
Yeah, please.
So Dr. Stephen Porges is the one who created this model called the polyvagal theory. And what he studied is our autonomic nervous system. And basically, so poly means many. Polyvagal is just like autonomic nervous system is very connected. But the oldest part of the nervous system is the dorsal. And this dorsal nerve, this is the one that goes down deep, kind of below our diaphragm. So it's natural that you think people have these gut reactions. And I know personally, when I get stressed, it's my gut. It gets very tight. My diaphragm gets pushed up. That's me. This dorsal is the oldest part of our autonomic nervous system. It's like 500 million years old. This is the reptilian one. This is where we freeze. And this is where the system shuts down. This is in situations where someone was maybe being attacked and they didn't do anything. And people are like, what? Like, why didn't you scream? Why didn't you run? Why didn't you? Well, the system just didn't. It just shut down. It went into that dorsal. Now, the next one is, we've heard about these things like fight or flight, right? The parasympathetic, this is active. This is like, so the dorsals, I can't do anything. The parasympathetics, I can do something. I'm going to fight. I'm going to like push back, or I'm going to run for it. And often we need this. Actually, like athletes need this, right? To jump into gear, right? To go for it. And it can serve a useful purpose. Now, the highest part of this is called the ventral. And the ventral is the safe place. This is when you're in the present moment. This is when there's like this sense of like flow or freedom. And this is something we can do to self-regulate, but we also get to co-regulate. And this is really the importance of being in a safe space, that a teacher provides that safe space, that the environment, the students feel safe, so that they, ideally can get to this state of the ventral vagus nerve.
I see. So if I'm getting this straight, whenever we're thinking of trauma, a lot of the trauma takes place in this dorsal nerve space where there's some kind of, I guess, incapacitation to learn in that space where you just are unable to do anything. The trauma kind of takes over physically what you're able to do. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah. So we get triggered in different ways. So some people do shut down. Some people fight, right? You've got, you think of kids, right? And, behavior, lashing out, or the hypervigilant. They're very nervous, apprehensive. They're in that kind of protection mode. It's difficult for them to really be open to learning.
Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of people think that the trauma is occurring in the headspace, in the mind, right? And so mind over matter theory tells us we should be able to take that event, look at it as something in isolation, and be able to move past it. But all of these theories and scientists tell us that trauma doesn't just exist in, your mind or in that isolated incident. It's carried in your body afterwards, and that's why it's so challenging to move past. I'm really glad that Sherry presented us with a more comprehensive way to think about trauma. It really isn't just about getting over it. Even if an individual processes trauma, it can still live on in the body, sort of dormant until it's triggered.
Yeah, having this information, understanding that there are often layers of trauma, this can impact how you approach your own trauma and that of your students.
Listeners, we've linked the resources Sherry mentions in the show notes for the episode if you're interested in learning more.
How can teachers recognize when there is trauma in their classrooms? How would they see the signs of that? How would they know to recognize it?
Well, again, for every individual, it's going to be different, right? So for some individuals, they're going to go inward. They're going to not really connect with others, with you as a teacher. Some there'll be behavioral issues. Some, they're going to maybe talk about not sleeping or having nightmares, having health problems. So as a teacher, it's a lot, right? Because we want to teach content, but it's difficult to get to the content without really connecting with the individual and making sure that they're going to be able to receive it. Yeah. So it's going to show up in many different ways. It's hard to say exactly one way.
Yeah. Well, what you just said reminds me of the quote that, we don't teach content, we teach individuals, right? And so learning to recognize that these symptoms of trauma or, remnants of trauma show up in really different ways. It's really critical, right, for us to be able to be effective, not so much in teaching content necessarily. To me, that's sort of secondary, right? It's about connecting with individuals and fostering, relationships before you can really dive in. And I think that when it comes to working with, individuals with trauma, some more than others, it can be harder to break open that shell. And we didn't specify like an age group, what does trauma look like in children, adolescents, and adults? Because, you've mentioned all of the different ways that it could show up. And, we could have adults shutting down. We could have adults misbehaving. I know Anna and I have certainly had our experiences with, adult learners who were thinking they're not supposed to be, disrupting class, but pausing to say there could be something deeper there, right? It's not necessarily that they are looking to control the classroom or your attention. They might be calling out for attention for other reasons, for other things that we haven't addressed.
Yeah. Not judging them for a certain behavior, but trying to understand maybe where that is coming from.
Exactly. What's beneath the behavior? Yeah.
We're starting to transition into this idea of what do teachers do when they're presented with students that have faced trauma. And as within the field of ESL, your experience and the experience of many educators is that, yes, there are these students who have experienced very extreme situations, especially in that refugee population, right? War, violence, gender issues to the extreme. There are so many different variations of what could induce their response, to that trauma. But so for teachers now, thinking about how to work with and engage with and empathize with these students, what are some of the ways that teachers can kind of be prepared to work with that?
Yeah, this is really an important question, and it's really difficult. But the big thing is that teachers and all of us, we need to take care of ourselves first, right? It's, the cliche is again, the oxygen mask, and we kind of know it, but are we doing it, right? I mean, the last few years, how many people have been, to say the least, stressed out or traumatized, right? It's been really a tough few years, and we all get to take care of ourselves. There's burnout, people have a sense of that, but there's even things like vicarious trauma, secondary trauma, where we can take on the trauma of another individual. And of course, there's also on the other side, I'll just say there's also compassion resilience, right? So we work with individuals and we're like, oh my gosh, they're so amazing, and we learn from them, but we need to really be careful and set boundaries so that we don't get triggered. And really, secondary trauma is when we kind of our perceptions alter. And we really kind of almost, we suffer a form of trauma. So teachers get to take care of themselves. And that's, self-care. This is doing all their own work, because teachers get triggered too, right? So whether it's, one teacher might get triggered if a child or if an adult speaks out in an aggressive way, or someone else could get triggered like, oh, why are they going inward, and why aren't they speaking up, and what? So why is it that this is triggering this individual? So it's really looking at yourself as a teacher and understanding your own trauma, and also finding ways to take care of yourself.
Anna, you and I have both worked with students experiencing trauma, or students who have told us outright that they have experienced trauma in the past. And we've talked about this on different episodes, the question of whether to directly confront trauma or act as a safe space for our students.
Right. In episode 6, Teaching in PD Through the Pandemic, and episode 21, Addressing Current Events in the Classroom, we both share our experiences and doubts in those moments about how to talk about the hard stuff.
And ultimately, we landed on the most frustrating of all possible answers. It depends, right? That there are just so many factors to consider, and that includes knowing ourselves, our limits, and creating boundaries that honor those things.
Yes, it's hard to know whether to broach the subject or not and how your students are going to react.
It's up to the teacher, right? So what you can handle, and it's up to your current student population and what they're like. So sharing a story can be so healing and it's so wonderful. It can be really painful, and that's okay too, right? I remember in Toronto having a student that, he didn't want anything that was remotely touchy-feely, and he would be like, why are we not learning grammar, right? So sometimes it's, like even spelling out, kind of the objective of why we're doing certain things can be important, but there's a time and space. So I don't know, like honestly, it's kind of up to the teacher. So in my class, with this group of Afghan women, I'll say I've never laughed or cried more with a group of individuals. But we could do that and it felt safe. Also, in my case, when I started doing some of this, I had a couple volunteers who had a background in marriage and counseling therapy. Like I felt a bit of security in that. And I also knew with the women, I knew them well enough that they could come back. Like they had the resiliency to come back. I had one student who's been diagnosed with bipolar. Her sharing a story, it's not going to help her. She's just going to repeat and start crying, and it's just going to go off. So I know her. So I'm like, oh, I'm going to bring her right back, and I'm going to cut it short. Where another student, I'm going to give them the time. And the other thing is, we don't know. Like, it's not just about opening up a conversation about something that could be painful. What do we teach? Family? That's going to be painful. We talk about housing. We talk about health. But even we don't talk about those things. Like, for example, this psychologist was talking about like different things to bring joy to our lives, right? And so she said, oh, like listening to music. Like, what kind of music do you like to listen to? And they're like, oh, in our country, the music is religious and it reminds us of this and this. And then that just spiraled into, them breaking down crying. It was really painful. So, something that we assume, like, oh, music, I'm sure you've got a song that's going to cheer you up. Not always.
Can't make that assumption.
Yeah. So it's knowing, I guess, again, like you as a teacher, your students at that time, and then sometimes it's going to be you allowing that space and you see that it's needed, right? Like, especially if there's something shared, like even like if you have a group of students, whether some people might be working with intensive English learners and they were alone during the pandemic, it's something they've shared. They can share this painful experience, right? Sometimes if one student is triggered, you might know that, they've got this buddy, they can take it outside the classroom. Or you're going to say, you know what, this is really important and I want to hear about it. Let's talk about it after class. This is a skill any teacher, but also, language teachers need to have this, that you are flexible and you're going to roll with it. If it feels right that you're going to go in this space that could become very emotional, you do it. And if you say, you know what, I need to put a cap on it, I need to bring this in, you do it. You need to make that call at that time.
Yeah, Sherry, I think that's great advice for any teacher, is just getting to know your students and what they need, and then also you yourself as a teacher, what you're able to offer on any given day, right? Because it's always going to be different. So recognizing what you're able to offer, using different strategies, learning about your students, all of that is well and good. But Anna, some of our listeners might be thinking about how time-consuming all of this sounds. We're not therapists, we're teachers.
Yeah.
It's been like kind of slapped in our face or across our face that we can't not deal with the emotions of our students and ourselves. It's impacting our learning, it's impacting our health, it's everything. So
Absolutely. I love just this humanness, talking about the way that we connect and the way that we recognize emotion in others. I also remember, you mentioned that with Glocally Connected, you were able to bring in a psychologist or multiple psychologists. And I do remember from the workshop that you had mentioned, there's a distinction, right, between what a psychologist can do and what a teacher can do in those situations. So I wonder if you are willing to expand a little bit on that, because as a teacher, I don't always feel perfectly equipped to, work through something with a student. And it's really, to me, important to know what the boundary is. And also, it's important to know what the resources are for your students. So I'm wondering if you would mind speaking to that a little bit.
Yeah, I'm going to share 2 quotes that I always share that speak to this. And so one is from the United Nations High Commissions for Refugees, UNHCR. You should not diagnose your students. You are not a therapist. So we're not therapists. We're not trained to be therapists. This is from the Center for Victims of Torture. You don't need to be a therapist to be a healing presence. So this is the idea of teachers taking care of themselves. Because when we show up and we're stressed out, well, one, we can tell our students that. And, I'll tell you one of the big takeaways from the psychiatrist, Dr. Marianne, they shared different things they learned, like when they were stressed about breathing, waking up in the morning, going to the balcony, taking deep breaths. But they also said when she shared her challenges in life, they could not get over it. Because, the way they saw her was that she was this successful professional woman, and she was showing her vulnerability. Mm-hmm. And they're like, oh, we don't do that. We've got to be strong. And being strong means you don't talk about these things and you just grin and bear it. So, and sometimes, that we show up in a way that we just say, what, I had a, whatever, this is what's happening in my life. Now, this is not to unload all your troubles with your class, but sometimes just showing up. So we are a healing presence. We get to create a classroom that our students feel safe, that there's a sense of community, a place where they can go. And we can only do so much.
Sherry reminds us that we can only do so much, which I think has been a major pain point for both of us while working with victims of trauma and just in general.
Absolutely. Knowing our personal limitations is something that we're always working on. And that's why having a strong understanding of the community we're working within, the resources available to us when working with students, knowing how we can refer them when we've reached the bottom of our toolbox, it's essential. Started to answer our final question about, handling the trauma of others and their own trauma, this idea of making sure that you're taking care of yourself, maybe being aware of the trauma that might exist in you, right? Paying attention to that, to do the inner work to then be better for others. So what I'm hearing as a yogi, I'm hearing fill your cup first, right? Fill your own 100%. Cup first. But what else? What else can teachers do?
Right. So of course, outside the classroom, teachers get to take care of themselves, like physical and emotional and relational and all those things. And in the class, there are a lot of things we can do as well. So what happened with my students, a lot of times, I'd be like, okay, we only have 2 hours. We need to get down to business. And then they've come in that day and something's happened in their country, good or bad. It just would be difficult for them to get right into learning. So doing something to get them out of, we'll say, their heads maybe. It could be something physical. So it could be something like getting them to settle down and do some breath work. Anything where, like say with breath work, when the exhale is longer than the inhale, it's very calming to our nervous system and we feel safe. So the idea is always to bring ourselves, our students, to the present moment. So there's all these things to do with that, like bringing you to the present moment. So it's like breath work. It could be self-hugs. And then even where you hug yourself, you tap your shoulders, but you go left, right. And there's something about this back and forth that's very regulating.
Do you feel it,
enjoying
Anna?
It?
It's really
enjoying
nice.
this.
Other things. Last year, a local psychologist came and she continued teaching strategies. Dr. Kimber. One is, if I can explain it here, you take your index finger and your middle finger and you put it, you can say your third eye or between your eyes, and you make the shape of a heart with your fingers around your face. So you go up over your forehead and around your cheek and down to your chin. And you do this a number of times. Of course, any stretching or with my students, because I have all women, I can do things like dance. But even some of them are like, oh, I don't want to dance. But you're like, okay, just move your shoulders. And then it kind of gets them giggly and laughing and just, again, in the moment. Anything to get them, grounded, secure in themselves, and feeling just, safe right now is really important.
So this idea that trauma is really a physical experience, I think that's really my biggest takeaway from today. And all of these strategies are very physical. And Shey, we've talked about the importance of just movement in the classroom. It really speaks to that, even if it's not specifically the heart around your face or tapping your shoulders, giving yourself a self-hug. Just having some kind of movement in class to kind of get out, get our bodies to feel more present.
Yes. And it's so empowering to think that we are all equipped with this tool. That is, our bodies are just these incredible tools. They tell us when something is off and they remind us where home is. It's pretty inspiring.
It is. Teachers, if you're feeling inspired, you can find the references from today's episode, along with information about Sherry's organizations and her recommended resources on the show notes.
And of course, we want to hear from you. How has trauma manifested itself in your classroom? How do you address trauma in the classroom? What recommendations or resources would you suggest for a new teacher?
You can join the conversation on our various social media accounts. Email us via our contact form at teacherthinkaloud.com or comment via Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube. We welcome your reflections, questions, and ideas.
We do. And also, as a reminder, we're still gathering listener contributions for our Friends of the Podcast episode, where we will integrate lots of different voices of our listeners from around the world.
If you haven't already, check out the questions we posted on social media. You can contribute your answers by joining our Friends of the Podcast WhatsApp chat at bit.ly/pod_friends. We want to know who you are, where you are, what you do, your strengths and challenges, and something unique about your teaching context.
And if WhatsApp isn't for you, you can also email us at teacherthinkaloud@gmail.com or write to us on social media. We're so eager to learn about you, members of this community of practice.
Thanks so much for joining us on the Teacher Think Aloud podcast. And until next time, happy teaching
and happy reflecting.